Welcome to a visit to Beamish Museum in the northeast of England, taking a trip back in time to a place filled with wondrous things. I went to Beamish with my eldest daughter and family, and the first thing to do was board the bus to take us to the first destination. You have a choice, you can walk round Beamish or you can get the bus, and owing to the fact I have something called plantar fasciitis which affects my feet, the bus seemed like a really good idea. Once on the bus I looked out of the window and I thought there were some cardboard cutouts of soldiers on the hill. And it was only when the cardboard cutouts started to move I realised that they weren't cardboard cutouts but real people. The first destination is the Wagon Way, a very interesting place to be. And as this sign clearly says, the loco running today is Puffing Billy. I also recorded this shot, an interesting plaque on the wall. If you want to read what it says, please pause the video. What's interesting about Beamish is most of the things here were originally somewhere else. Even a lot of the buildings, they were brought to Beamish and rebuilt here. Inside the Wagon Way carriage shed was a really nice beam engine. You can see how big it is by the size of the door to the left of it. This is not a full beam engine, it's called a half beam, better known as a grasshopper beam engine. I used to have a model of one of these. This is only a small one and it's in very good condition. Here's the maker's plate, I'm sure you recognise the name. A lot of early steam engines used the same principle as the grasshopper beam, and here is a perfect example. This is not an original, it's a replica, but it's a very good one. You can see how it works. There are two grasshopper beam engines, one at each side, that turn a central axle, and the main drive to the wheels is via gears, which seems to me to be a really complicated way of doing it, but you have to remember that the people who built this engine originally had nothing else to go on. They just developed from this point. Everything on this steam engine is a replica, including the water gauge, and the original never had brakes like this on the tender, so was told by one of the people operating the locomotive. Here you can clearly see the grasshopper beam layout, two of them, one at each side. I'll do a flashback to the one in the carriage shed, and as you can see, here it is, and the principle of operation is almost identical to the steam locomotive, except of course there are two of them on that. The locomotive was surprisingly quiet. No chuff chuff sound, because this locomotive is very early, and the first locomotive to be fitted with a blast pipe was Stephenson's rocket, which was later than this. The boiler at the front of the engine is domed. This is definitely not for streamlining, it's to allow the boiler to best resist the pressure inside. In its day this locomotive was known as a high pressure steam engine, running at 50 pounds per square inch. This made me smile. In the tender is a Clark compressor, and this is not a replica of a Clark compressor, it's an original. And what's it doing here? Well, I think it's used for the braking system. At the moment the locomotive is being coupled to a passenger truck. I was going to have a ride behind this locomotive, but sadly one of the operators said that owing to COVID-19 they were only allowed to take 3 passengers and there was already quite a queue forming. Plus the weather forecast for this day was not very good. Besides, I got sufficient footage I think to describe what it was. And there is a lot more to Beamish Living Museum than this. The locomotive reversed up to the platform, and after this it was time for me to go. The last time I went to Beamish there was a tram running, but that was nowhere to be seen today. I think that they also run steam locomotives. I would think it's a concession to the pandemic. As Beamish is basically a very large ring, this bus just went round and round, and you could hop on it and hop off it at your next destination. This railway line you can see is part of the tram line. The tram lines in the town look like this, but when they're not in the town, they just look like an ordinary railway line. And here I am in the town area. I was born in 1953, and it occurs to me that not much had changed between the Victorian or Edwardian period and the 1950s. Where I lived in Dewsbury, West Yorkshire, there were cobbled streets and tram lines for a long time when I was a kid. The shops are fantastic. Look at this chemist shop. I didn't know what balm of Gilead was, so I googled it, and I suggest you do the same because there are lots of definitions. From my point of view, the best shop in the town is the garage. The smell of old petrol and oil inside this shop is really good. There are lathes, a shaper, a power hacksaw, and they're all driven by the steam engine here shown at the back in the next room. Here's a close-up shot of some of the old lathes, which are all driven by fast and loose belting. This lathe is called a Drummond round bed, and I remember reading articles written by LBSC model engineer, and he was always talking about these Drummond round bed lathes. Here is a clear shot of the overhead shafting connected to the steam engine which drives the machine tools. The layout of this garage workshop is wonderful, with old cars to boot. I really like this advert plate on the wall. But really, I liked all of it. Look at the shelves, it looks like part of my workshop, but older. I went outside the garage workshop and took some shots through the window. Vintage cars and vintage motorcycles, what a combination. And just look at this collection of headlamps. How nice are they? I think it's time to go back outside and carry on with the tour, starting with a cart full of teddy bears. Time for one last shot of the Beamish Motor and Cycle Works. Here's a better shot of the chemist and dispensary. No town back in the day would have been without a cooperative society. There are quite a lot of back alleys in Beamish, just like there used to be in Dewsbury, where I was raised. And one of the alleys opened up into this, a livery yard, and here are people washing horses, and here are people again washing the horses. The white horses were getting washed so much I wondered if they started off brown. And then when they became white, did they just dye them brown again for the next day? I thought this was a bit of a strange exhibit. Why have they put a dead dog on one of the carts? Then I realised when it moved it wasn't a dead dog. Maybe it was drugged or superglued to the seat. To take in the wonders of Beamish in one visit is quite difficult. Here is the park complete with the bandstand, very similar to the one in Dewsbury Park where I used to live. Although there wasn't one of these in Dewsbury. I decided to omit going inside the terrace houses. To be honest, I have seen these before and they look just like some of the houses I've been in recently, although if you are at Beamish it's worth looking inside. Here's a public drinking water fountain, you don't see these anymore. This is the tea room, I thought I'd go in and have a quick cup of tea. Followed by a look round the Masonic Lodge. This is beautifully preserved. The lodge of the province of Durham, complete with the all-seeing eye. I would say this is very well preserved, but it's about average. Most Masonic lodges are like this. Moving on, I went to the bank next door, and once again this just reminded me of our local bank when I was younger. This is a reassembled branch of Barclays Bank. It must have been quite a task rebuilding these places brick by brick. Here's the bank manager's office, looking very opulent. And here's the area where the bank clerks sat. This clip looks like something from Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. Time to go back outside, just in time to catch a bus. I don't know if this bus was taking passengers, it seemed to be empty most of the time. Note the solid tyres, no pneumatics here. The railway station was deserted apart from one chap doing something. Nothing to see here, so I walked down to the fairground. The weather was starting to take a turn for the worse. It was just starting to rain. Here's the large roundabout with the horses on. I think this one is probably electrically driven. There was a time when these were powered by steam engines in the centre. There is something called the home farm area, and I caught this clip of a very disgruntled pig. The flies buzzing round its head must have been driving it mad. Then I noticed a couple of Lister D petrol engines. I have one of these under my bench in the workshop. And to the right-hand side of the two Lister D engines was a scrap portable engine. These were not traction engines, they were different. They were towed into the position required by horses and then used to drive machinery. Outside on a junk pile I noticed an old steam cylinder. Here you can clearly see the steam inlets and the exhaust port in the centre. And in this clip, if you can just look through the spider webs, you can clearly see the steam inlet to the cylinder from the port on the port block. I decided to call it a day because it was starting to rain quite heavily. I sat in the bus shelter to wait for the bus, and while I was there I filmed some shots of the colliery and pit village. I also filmed the back wall of the shelter showing the bricks with all the writing on. Then suddenly, as the video began, it all went into black and white. Here's the bus stop, and here's the bus. Stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it entertaining. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website. and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.